interested in these funds to make sure that folks that are looking for a collaboration can get one, that we know what the state's doing and what private entities are doing, so we can amplify our opportunity to bring those funds to Missouri. So our next panel is on energy storage as an economic driver for Missouri. So if we could have our speakers come up, specifically Phil Brown with ICL, Creighton Brown with Intersys, and Chris Devo with Go Run. And I believe first up is Chris. And just make sure that you have the mic closer to your mouth so the folks online can hear.
Thank you. Am I on? Okay, good afternoon. My name is Chris Neville. I'm the Asset Development Director for the Go Run Company. And if you're not familiar with Go Run, we are a mining and metals company based here in Missouri. I've been here about 160 years. I haven't been here the whole time. I've been here about 10 years. And I have with me today Tammy Stanke, who is our Director of Communications for Go Run, and she's also a member of a number of the Battery Association trade groups. She knows a lot about energy storage and batteries. So if I get any hard questions, I'll defer those to Tammy. Again, we are a mining and metals company. We have one of the largest underground mines in Missouri. We also have one of the largest battery recycling facilities in the state of Missouri. So a lot of people don't know that. And that's our operations. We provide raw materials to the battery industry, predominantly what our materials are used for. And we have an opportunity in this state of Missouri, great opportunity in the topics of critical minerals, which I'll be talking about today. We supply some of those minerals in the market today. We have an opportunity to expand that in Missouri. We're also very keen on energy storage and battery manufacturing. That's our business and what our materials go into. So next slide, please. I'm going to start with the good news. So if we can go to the next slide, the good news is that the battery market manufacturing is very strong, and the projections are very good for the future. So that's good for our company. It's good for a lot of battery manufacturing companies that are based here in Missouri. So what you can see from these projections is the battery market projections are very strong. This shows a 20-year projection, 10 years we've already seen. We've seen tremendous growth. On the left side is the total capacity of energy storage projection, up to almost a 10-fold increase over this period, which is amazing. On the right side is the size of the market in terms of dollar amounts, about a 5-fold increase over this period, up to a 275 billion market, with some really impressive projections over the next 10 years, mostly driven by electric vehicle batteries. You can see the color coding there. The blue bars on the left are electric vehicle-based batteries or lithium batteries. The bottom green is lead-based batteries, which is really the base of what we mostly produce today. And on the right-hand side is, again, the dollars. On the top, the dark green is the electric vehicle-specific battery projections. And again, the bottom is the lead-based batteries, which for our industry is a mature industry, and it's still showing like 3% growth, which is a very strong growth. But the really dramatic opportunity is in the electric vehicle batteries, or the future of electric vehicles. This is a worldwide projection. The next slide, please. This shows the stationary battery projection. So non-vehicular applications like grid storage or electric vehicle battery charging applications. Again, very strong growth, strong demands. This is all types of batteries, where it's lead-based, lithium-based. And I think our view at this point is it's really everything, all the materials that we have at our disposal to try and meet these demands. It's going to be all the different types of batteries that we need. So there's opportunities in all the market sectors. Next slide, please. So what I previously showed was the global market. Looking here at Missouri, one of the positives, again, we have a very strong supply chain here in Missouri. We're the second largest battery industry supply chain in the nation here in Missouri, between the raw material supply and the battery manufacturing. We have all the brand name battery manufacturers in Missouri located here, manufacturing batteries. That's a really good base to work from to expand on for the future. We've got a great opportunity in this market sector of energy storage and battery manufacturing. Slide, please. So I'm going to shift to the bad news, which I'm going to reframe as the challenge that we have in front of us. That really is the supply of these critical minerals that we need to make batteries. And this is getting a lot of attention in recent years. Some of the new legislation that's already been briefed on today, like the IRA and the DIL acts are really trying to address this issue. There's significant investments in trying to encourage investment and provide direct investment through grants for critical minerals and battery manufacturing in the United States. I think a lot of this came out of some executive orders from recent years, just an acknowledgement from the administration that there's been a real problem here developing, that we have a real lack of supply of these materials in order to manufacture these batteries. So that becomes the real question. We have really strong demands, really strong opportunities, but without the supplies, how are we going to manufacture these batteries? Now, this slide, just for a definition standpoint, we can go back to that slide. Second. Defining what critical minerals are, we can go back to slide. So in case you haven't heard of this topic of critical minerals, and you may not be aware that most of the metal that we use in our manufacturing is imported in the United States. More than 50% of all metals comes in from imports. And critical minerals are a subset of that, but in all of our supply chains, for all of our critical industries, we need these critical minerals. And there's a list of these minerals. The U.S. Geological Survey was tasked with coming up with this list. There's about 50 of them, and there are things that are mostly imported at this point, including rare earth metals. You may have heard of those. That's a subset of these critical minerals. I've highlighted some of those that are used specifically in battery manufacturing, like antimony, cobalt, tin. Zinc is also a critical mineral that we produce. And so we're really trying to figure out how to ramp up the supplies of these critical minerals here in the United States. Next slide, please. If you look more specific to battery manufacturing, and particularly electric vehicles, some of the metals that are most critical that we're talking about are lithium, cobalt, nickel, rare earth elements. I've got copper in this slide. It's not considered a critical mineral, but it's essential to manufacturing of automobiles and to batteries, and it's mostly not manufactured here in the United States. If you look at these strong demands in terms of vehicles, in terms of energy storage capacity, that's the real missing link, is where are we going to get these critical minerals. Next slide, please. Just to illustrate this point, this slide shows a typical electric vehicle battery, a 1,000-pound battery, and what it's composed of. If you look at what's in that battery, there's about 25 pounds of lithium, 30 pounds of cobalt, nickel, graphite, copper, aluminum, steel. There's a lot of metal in these batteries, and there's also a lot of metal in the vehicle itself. Electric vehicles are a lot heavier than the standard vehicle. And the problem with that is, to provide that one battery, that takes 90,000 pounds of ore in terms of mining to produce that battery. And I've seen projections that it'll take about 10 times the amount of mining on the planet to provide these metals than what we have today. So that's really the supply chain issue, is how do we ramp up the supply of these metals? And then also, how do you recycle that? That projection is based on just mining new metal. Recycling is not in that calculation. Recycling should be an important part of that. With respect to the existing battery market, 99% of all lead batteries are recycled, the most highly recycled commodity on the market. But electric vehicle batteries, it's a real challenge. You look at all these materials that are in this battery. How do you take that apart? How do you recycle it? How do you gather these materials? That really hasn't been solved yet. And people are working on that. There are some startups working on battery recycling, but it's a real challenge from an economics and a chemistry point of view. Next slide, please. This map shows, this colorful map shows where our critical minerals come from today. So if you look at the chart on the left, really a deep red color shows where we get most of our critical minerals, and that comes from China. More than 50% of the world's metal of all types comes from China. And in some cases, almost all of these critical minerals come from China. There's other places where we get our metals, like Canada, which is a friendly neighbor, which is great. But also, there are mineral deposits in Canada owned by Chinese companies. So it's nothing that's happening throughout the world. The Chinese are being very aggressive about pursuing mineral deposits. The Congo is the largest supply of cobalt, for example, that mines the cobalt, but most of that goes to China for production of metal. So it's not just the mining, it's the metal production. There's other places like Russia, obvious geopolitical risk here on this map. Easy to interrupt these supply chains, as we saw during COVID. Now we're seeing with the Ukraine war. There's a lot of risk in that these supply chains get interrupted and we can't manufacture. Next slide, please. So this is a look back on where we came from. If you go back to 1990, the United States was the world's largest producer of metal of all types. In that period, up to now, we've dropped to number 7 and declining. There are a number of metal facilities that are on the verge of closure. And so the issue is just the metal production. In that same time frame, China in particular has ramped up their construction of new facilities. And they have modern, large metal production facilities that dominate the market. And they produce 40% of the world's copper, 35% of the world's nickel, 65% of the cobalt, 50% of lithium, and 87% of rare earths. So it presents a real challenge. If we're trying to ramp up our production here, how do we offset this? There's a lot of factors that go into this. Next slide, please. So what's driving the lack of investment in the United States? Why aren't we developing in mining and metals? And why do we have 100% of certain metals, like 17 minerals, are being imported that we don't produce at all? About 50 minerals that we're 50% reliant upon. So it puts us in a real strategic disadvantage for having to have those in our supply chain, having them available. Next slide, please. What it comes down to is just mining and metals has become difficult in terms of permitting, timelines, approvals. It takes typically 10 years or more to actually permit a new mine or a new metals facility. I know several large mineral deposits in the United States that have been in the process for more than 10 years. I don't think they'll ever get permits. Meanwhile, places like China and other places, they don't have these obstacles. You know, they decide to do a project that's bankrolled by their central government and they do it. So it's a lot more complicated here. Next slide. So shifting back to more of the good news, in trying to counteract this issue, there has been a real significant U.S. government response. We talked about the Inflation Reduction Act, the bipartisan infrastructure law. Both of these are really large investments, trying to put money into offsetting and playing the level of the playing field to get investment into the United States. And this comes out of some of these executive orders that I mentioned that recognize this problem. It's still, while it's a positive, it's still complicated. If you look at these programs, we've certainly looked at them. We're trying to bring on new facilities here in Missouri. And we're trying to combine tax credits, grant programs, private financing. You pretty much need a PhD in finance to be able to put these projects together. We're talking about projects that are hundreds of millions to billion-dollar projects to get these new facilities online. Next slide. So more positives, again, for Missouri, we've got some very significant opportunities. I'm going to focus on that in my last few slides. I have the next slide. Picture shows a blow up of southeast Missouri. We've been blessed with minerals in Missouri. For the last 300 years, there's been mining in Missouri of metals. And this also shows where our operations are mostly located. We do mining today in the area of Viburnum. That shows blue dots show our mines. It also shows that in the orange dot, our recycling facilities are all co-located. That's been operating for about 60 years. It's extraordinary. There's not many mining districts in the world that last for 60 years. And as far as we know, we'll be there another 60 years, mining lead, copper, and zinc. Unfortunately, everything we mine in Missouri is now exported abroad and produced into metal for other countries, which is a shame. We have no metal production in the United States for what we're producing. We do have a recycling plant there. So we do recycle batteries. We're about 10% of the U.S. supply of material for recycled batteries. But we don't make enough in the United States. We still have imported about 30% of what we need for battery manufacturing. We do have opportunities on this map because of the geology. There's other minerals like cobalt, nickel, and copper, and more opportunities to produce metal from this region. I'm going to focus on that on the next slide. So, in the big picture, we do have other mining resources in Missouri. We currently produce lead, copper, and zinc, but we do have cobalt and nickel in our resource, and we're now working on technologies to recover that. Currently, we mine these materials, we ship them abroad, they wind up in China or other places, and they recover the cobalt and nickel, and we don't. So we're trying to change that. We also have our recycling resources. We're going to recycle lead materials. We also have tin and antimony, which are critical minerals that mostly come from China. We're working on ways to recover those and put them back into the battery feed as alloy material. We have legacy resources. Like I said, we have 300 years of mining history here. We have slag, tailings, and other materials like chat that have these metals in them, and we're working on technologies to go back and revisit those materials, reprocess them, and recover these metals. Next slide, please. This is my last slide, which kind of summarizes what our focus has been to try and offset this challenge. It's very difficult to permit new facilities in the United States, mostly because of environmental concerns. Bill Run as a company has invested $500 million in the last 10 years, for example, on environmental programs, which is a very positive thing, but also makes it challenging to invest in our core business and developing new facilities. And what we've been trying to do is develop new facilities that are environmentally sound, that reduce or eliminate any kind of emissions or carbon. So the trend here is to try and move from pyrometallurgy. If you think about a metal production facility, most people think of a smelter, big furnaces. What we're trying to shift to is hydrometallurgical processes, which are chemistry-based, don't have the air emissions issues or water issues. We've been developing multiple technologies that would process these same materials and recover these critical minerals that are now being exported. So the goals of this are to get better recovery from our resources and capture all the byproducts like cobalt and nickel, which now we're exporting, to outperform any kind of environmental standard that we might anticipate. That's another issue in permitting a new facility. Companies are trying to look into the future. If I'm going to build a new facility, will I meet future air standards? In a lot of cases, decisions, well, we can't predict that. So what we're trying to do is develop technologies to meet any standard in terms of air quality. And the hydromet facility can do that. And we want to be able to get all of the resources out, all the metals out of the resources, whether it's copper, nickel, cobalt, zinc. We can recover all that with hydromet. So these pyro furnaces typically only recover one metal, and the rest of it goes out as waste or gets shipped abroad. So those are where we're at. These investments are large investments, hundreds of millions of dollars to do each project. There is one project that's been launched in Southeast Missouri recently. It was mentioned earlier, U.S. Metals, Missouri Cobalt. They're building one of these facilities to open a new cobalt mine. And we have 2 or 3 of these projects in progress right now for both recycling and mining so that we can start producing metal here in Missouri again for the battery industry. So with that, I'll close and turn it over to the next speaker.
Thank you. So first, I didn't put a couple of slides in, but I probably should have, because I'm going to ask you a first question, which is, I think I know the answer. Maybe one person in here knows, but does anybody know who ICL is? Most people know. Oh, sorry. Most people don't know who ICL is. So I'll give you a tiny bit of background, because we've been in St. Louis for over 150 years and in Missouri over 150 years, not necessarily always as ICL. A lot of our roots and legacy go back to Monsanto here in North America, but ICL is a global chemical company. We are dual listed on the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange, so ICL stands for Israel Chemicals Limited, and we're also listed on the New York Stock Exchange. You might know us, a lot of people, if you did know us, would recognize us as a fertilizer company. We're a very large global fertilizer company. We're about a $10 billion company globally. Within that, we have a phosphate division, run our phosphate division on a global basis, but I sit here in St. Louis. St. Louis is actually our North American headquarters for the overall business. We have headquarters in each major region around the world. That headquarters sits here in Creve Coeur. We also have a manufacturing facility in South St. Louis in the Carondelet neighborhood. We also have R&D facilities and research here in St. Louis in the Webster Groves area. So that's a little bit of background about ICL. And I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about, so you're talking about a lot of this flood of potential funding and things that are coming from these bills and acts in there. I'm here to talk to you about a success story from that standpoint. We are a successful recipient as part of the Infrastructure Act. There was a funding opportunity, an FOA, for manufacturing, and specifically the supply chain, to build a portion of that supply chain out to supply the materials for the battery industry. And we're kind of that next step in the supply chain from what Chris was talking about with the critical minerals and raw material standpoint. As a company, we do that, but we also are a large, what we would call specialty chemical producer as well, which is where most of our phosphates go today. And the grant that we applied for was specifically to produce one of the cathode materials that go into a lithium battery, called lithium iron phosphate. It's one of those materials. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. But first, I'll talk a little bit about background. Chris went into some of it, and I see I use a lot of the same sources as him, Avicene Energy as well. So if we can go to the next slide, please. up in a little bit. So we'll go through some market backgrounds, some projections, ICL, a little bit about our value chain, who we are, what we're doing in that project, and then also specifically our DOE project. Next slide, please. So this, Chris talked a little bit about, right? We've already seen what's going on in the lithium battery market and the very, very fast acceleration and growth that it's seen and the projections of where it's moving when we look at it in the future. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. But when we talk about a battery, we talk about an EV, let's say, that has a battery pack or a module in it. How do we make that, right? And we start from critical raw materials. We have to make intermediate materials to do that. Ultimately, they have to make the cell. They take those cells, link them together to make a module, and ultimately a battery pack that goes in a car. So we're one step in that chain. But for us, and why we're very interested in it, one, we're already involved in a number of the key materials that go into that. But when we look at it and we talk about a battery, and Chris talked a little bit about that, when we look at especially a lithium battery, the cathode of that battery, the positively charged thing, right? Positive charged thing, negative charged thing, electrolyte that moves the stuff between. The cathode makes up the majority of the material in a lithium battery today. Lithium makes up the largest component overall because in most lithium batteries today, there's lithium in the cathode and there's also lithium in the electrolyte in the battery as well. So you can see there 28% of the battery is made up of cathode material, 9% an anode, and this is specific to and a little bit generic on most cases of a lithium battery, the separator, and then the electrolyte. Next slide, please. This is looking a little bit forward-looking here and talking about the different types of cathodes. So while we talk about a lithium battery, there are a lot of different cathode materials. Sorry, I keep putting this down. I'm usually loud enough, but I'll try to be louder for you guys with the microphone. There's a lot of different cathode materials, a lot of different positively charged things you can put in the battery to form the cathode material. And we're going to talk specifically today about lithium iron phosphate. You can see projections from a number of different studies and also from our standpoint that we think over the long range, the lithium iron phosphate cathode has the opportunity to be one of the dominant forms of the cathode as we move forward. It won't be the only one. I don't think as you look at the application of batteries, there's not going to be a one-size-fits-all lithium battery, or let's go to the next steps and it's continuing to evolve with solid state and other things. But we see LFP having a very strong future as we move forward. One of those is, as Chris just talked about, right, there's critical materials and minerals that need to go into that. There still are in an LFP battery, but you get down to much less in that case, right? Lithium is going to be common in all of them, but when we get to iron, in the case of replacing nickel and cobalt and manganese and other things in there, iron's pretty prevalent out there. It's readily available, relatively easy material to work with. Also, in some regards, and we'll talk a little bit about differences, safer than some of the other batteries. All metals will burn eventually, but iron has a much higher temperature from a runaway temperature standpoint than others do. So we feel very positive about the future of lithium iron phosphate as becoming one of the more predominant cathode types to be used in a lithium battery. Next slide. This just goes a little bit to the electrolyte side. ICL as a company as well is also involved in the electrolyte side of the battery. We, again, produce a number of the precursor materials. So if you're going to produce a LiPF6 electrolyte, which is the most common electrolyte in a battery today, whether it's an NMC battery, it's an LFP battery, it's the most common electrolyte that's being used in that battery today. The precursor materials also start from phosphorus, which we are a company that's core in our portfolio today. And again, we see a pretty good growth pattern there. We do think, and we're active as a company, we think the battery industry will continue to evolve and move, from more liquid electrolyte type batteries to solid state or solid electrolyte type batteries. We're very active in R&D in those areas today, and trying to drive, what some of the better materials should be or could be for solid electrolyte batteries as well. Next slide. This just gives you a little quick view if you wanted to compare. So here's a number of different cathode types or lithium ion battery types, right? We have an LCO, what we call LCO, lithium cobalt oxide battery, LMO, LNMC, LFP, different ones. And you can see, I'm not going to go through here, but the different, if you were to kind of give them a subjective ranking of what are they good at, what are they not as good at overall from a different battery type. And you can see a little bit why, we're very positive and why we want to invest in LFP. So if you look at LFP and kind of go across that table, it has a number of really good characteristics from an energy and power standpoint. The one, let's say, disadvantage LFP has compared to other technologies is it's inherently, from a chemistry standpoint, doesn't generate as high a voltage from an electrochemical standpoint than some of the other technologies do. As we said, it's safer, more readily available, which leads to a pretty good cost position on LFP compared to a number of the others as well. And when we talk about the cycling and life cycle of a battery, LFP performs quite well from an overall cycling standpoint and recharge perspective. It also is an area that we're very active in, and I think is going to be a key as we move forward, is recycling those batteries when they get to end of life. We're at the very beginning, a lot of this, especially growth in lithium batteries, so there hasn't been a huge amount of need yet. A lot of the batteries aren't coming to end of life, but they will be, and they need to be recycled. We see a great opportunity as well in an LFP battery because it is relatively simple, and the chemistry related to LFP under certain conditions can be reverted back to their primary raw materials and reformed again. So we see good opportunities similar to the lead battery industry with co-location of recycling with manufacturing to be able to do direct recycle with LFP specific battery back into an LFP production again. Next slide, please. We've already talked a little bit about this and where we're active today as a company, both in the electrolyte and also in the cathode material in the battery, and then a little bit about the next generations of solid electrolyte sulfide-based batteries. Next slide. So this is just a quick, some of the stuff that was in the press about the project that we were successful here. So I don't want to spend a lot of time here. It's probably more important to go to the next slide as well. And so what was our specific project here that ICL was successful within the infrastructure bill? Well, as I said, there was a funding opportunity that came out for manufacturing. We submitted a project specifically to produce LFP. Today, there is no LFP being produced in the Western world. The governments here, Europe, which we're also actively working in as well, want to develop local supply chains for that. I've heard a lot of comments today about people talking about we're building the cars, we're driving it, and how fast things are moving and how quickly things are evolving. This grant opportunity was the same. When the grant opportunity came out, we had a relatively short time window to respond to it in the grant. We had a great team that did a good job. It was announced in May, and by July, we had a full grant submission application, which was over 200 pages of documentation, very technical document, as well as economics to go along with it, as well as, many people have talked about, what do we need to do, because it also needed to satisfy a number of the things like the Justice 40 program in there as well. And so we had to build out all of those components in the grant application as well. We got great support from some number of people here in the room as well, from the state, from local organizations here in St. Louis, like Greater St. Louis, that were at the time also applying for a Build Back Better grant for the St. Louis region. So we're also having to look at some of the disadvantaged neighborhoods and communities within the St. Louis area, and so collaborated together to build the Justice 40 plan that was needed inside of our grant application. But ultimately what it resulted in was so far to date, there's been under this about $2.8 billion of funding that has been announced and awarded. At this point, we received a grant. Essentially, we submitted a $420 million project to build a facility here in South St. Louis to produce the LFP materials. We were granted a 50% cost share from the Department of Energy for that project. So we'll be receiving almost $200 million worth of funding for that project. And it was critical. You know, I won't share a ton, but if you look at the overall economics of that project, and we're a global company, we're operating in every major geography around the world, including China. As a company, the economics of this project would have been relatively difficult to justify based on the cost of capital to install and make it a competitive project here in North America for us. And so the grant gives us a great opportunity to do that, to really give us a head start to build out that supply chain plan in North America overall. This is just the last slide that shows a little bit from that award. A number of the other companies around the U.S. That were also part of the first initial grants, that $2.8 billion that were awarded in 21 projects. We're also working with and cooperating with a couple of them as well, because some of them are also interested and involved in electrolytes and other parts of the battery value chain. That's it.
All right. Really appreciate the speakers so far. Just by way of introduction, my name is Creighton Brown. Hopefully that's good enough there. And I am with Intersys. So for those of you not familiar with Intersys, can you go to the next slide, please? We are a global company involved in energy storage. And we produce, our primary focus is manufacturing of batteries. We also provide some of the electronic components that go along with energy storage. And we're involved with the renewable side, making inverters and such. But our primary focus is manufacturing. And we do have a very strong presence in the Midwest, particularly in Missouri. We have 3 manufacturing facilities. We have 2 of them in Springfield, Missouri, and 1 in Warrensburg. We also have a facility in Hayes, Kansas, and 1 actually in Richmond, Kentucky. And so we're very vested in the local economy of the Midwest and of Missouri specifically. And as such, we're very involved with the energy storage overall scene that we see. Now, energy storage, a lot of what you see in the news right now is related to grid scale renewable energy storage. But there's a lot of energy storage outside of those markets specifically, and that have actually been a strong need for many, many years. And so I'm just going to highlight some of those right now because it's a multi-billion-dollar industry that a lot of the raw materials that we're discussing from Doe Run and some of these places have supplied for many years. There are some growing needs as well that we'll discuss. So right now, for the past several years, there's been a strong need in telecom, broadband, industrial space, UPS data centers, and then residential backup power, as well as motive power. And when I say motive power, that's typically forklifts. It's also burden movers for airports and other things. You might not realize it, but every cell tower that you see has some sort of battery energy storage in it. So those gray cabinets that you see inside the fenced-in area, those are typically battery storage. That's why when the power goes out, your cell phone doesn't. And every data center has a huge battery bank. So if you think about the importance of a data center, what kind of information they're storing, if there is a power outage, it literally costs millions of dollars for them to be completely out. And they don't want to be in that situation. So most of them are equipped with diesel generators, but diesel generators don't get up and running immediately. It takes between 1 and 15 minutes to get to where they can sustain the load. So what they do is they install, you can see the large battery bank at the top of the screen there. They install racks and racks of batteries to be able to support that need for that time period. And in the past, these batteries have primarily been lead-based. So that means lead acid batteries, similar to what you have in your automobile to start your car. This is starting to transition to lithium, but there are certain challenges that come along with that. Not to go too deep into it, but coding, permitting, some of those challenges of adopting lithium into some of these environments has been a real challenge. And so as a result of that, we saw some charts earlier about the growth of energy storage, and lead acid-based batteries are going to continue to play an important role in that market, even as lithium begins to take some of that market share. And some of the emerging needs. So this is probably more what you hear about in the news and what you see coming and what we've kind of discussed here. DC fast charge is one. Elizabeth earlier noted in her EV slides that there are a lot of places where there isn't sufficient infrastructure to be able to support the high energy need that these DC fast chargers need. So envision a small rest stop in the middle of nowhere, and all of a sudden you're drawing as much power as 100 homes. They don't have that kind of infrastructure. And so energy storage coupled with these DC fast chargers is just one way to help alleviate that problem. The battery can act as a buffer to the grid. So there's not an instantaneous power draw on the grid, but that the battery takes up that difference. And then once the cars are gone, then the EV fast charge can then slowly charge back up at a lower controlled pace. The other emerging need is grid scale battery storage. And this is something I found interesting in, I'm sorry, I forgot his name. In an earlier presentation, Dennis Pruitt presented, he showed a map of some of the energy storage systems that are going in and some of these big, large scale storage. You notice they were all around the state of Missouri. And this is something that we are seeing globally. There is a huge need for energy storage. Unfortunately, Missouri is a little behind in that. And if we go to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about why, about some of the things. So the factors that are driving this increased growth in energy storage. So there are several of them. Data center needs are growing. So as these data centers increase in size and capacity, they need more and more power to back up. And so their size of their batteries are growing. Grid scale ESS energy storage systems, like we're talking about, these big containerized systems are becoming more and more needed in places where you have a high penetration of renewables. One of the bad, I guess, the cons of renewable energy is it isn't consistent. And this is really where Missouri comes in. So Missouri is right now about 75% coal capacity for energy production. What that does is that gives us a very stable grid. And that is a positive thing in some ways, but as we start to transition away from that coal power, we'll start to experience some of the same challenges that you hear about in the news with California, with Texas, with some of those outages that they experience. And so what these large scale energy storage systems do is they allow you to be able to mitigate some of those challenges that come along with renewables. So when there's a lot of power being produced during the day from solar, they can take some of the excess energy and charge these battery systems. Then when 5 o'clock rolls around and all of a sudden the sun starts going down and solar is not producing, then you need something to bridge that gap. That's also the highest peak time of energy usage. People are coming home from work, they're starting to cook dinner, they're doing laundry, they're doing all these things that is requiring a significant amount of energy. And these battery energy storage systems can help to extend that solar into the evening hours. In addition, talked a little bit about DC fast charge. Not only is infrastructure an issue, because there are places where fast charge will be installed where there is a good solid infrastructure, but one of the other challenges that comes with it is what's known as the demand charge. And certain utilities charge a high rate dependent on your peak usage. And so basically, if you are a gas station and you install a DC fast charger and your peak usage goes from maybe 100 kilowatts to 1.2 megawatts, you're going to get charged a fee that's based on that high number. and it's going to maybe double or triple your electric bill. So managing that peak number is very critical as we start to phase in electric vehicles. And some of the other things driving it, unreliable grids, natural disasters, and we're also, as we develop the technology to be able to interface between the energy storage and the grid gets better, then it makes it more feasible to do that as well. So next slide, please. Okay. Trying to leave a little bit of time for questions here. So in summary, energy storage demand is going to grow exponentially. This is going to happen globally, and it will happen in the state of Missouri as well. So it's just going to be a little bit behind, which I look at as maybe a beneficial thing for us. We have the opportunity to learn from our friends and our neighbors in other states who are ahead of us in this adoption of renewable resources and renewable energy production. And we can build our infrastructure ahead of the game as opposed to looking backwards, wishing that we had the energy storage to support our needs. And in addition, there's going to be a need for all technologies. So right now we have all these different battery companies that are racing to be the next best energy storage solution. We have several viable options available out there now, and there are going to be new ones coming. And because this market is going to be so big, we're not going to be able to do it all with lithium. We can't do it all with lead. We can't do it all with nickel zinc. We're going to have to work together as industries to be able to meet this demand. And it's really going to take players from all different fields. And we in the state of Missouri are poised very well to be able to help support this, as you've heard from several different people, from a raw material standpoint to a production. EnerSys has 3 plants. There are multiple other battery manufacturers in Missouri that provide lithium solutions as well as lead solutions. And we are in a situation where we can benefit greatly from this growing need in energy storage. And I will leave it at that. Thank you.
Any questions? Yeah, right.
Bryce Gray again with the Post Dispatch. You just mentioned that, it won't just fall on lithium or lead. Everything's going to need to be involved. I guess, could you elaborate though on sort of, well, how you envision maybe the pie getting sliced up in the future? We of course hear so much about lithium, but does the future sort of belong more to it than to lead, or how equitably will that pie get sliced? And I'm sure it varies, of course, by application, by industry, but what do you and Doe Run or all of you guys sort of foresee for that future?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but there are pretty clear projections on what that growth really looks like. Lead does expect a 2 to 3% growth over the next 5 to 10 years. Lithium will be a lot higher growth, and a lot of that will be to the EV market and the energy storage market. You also have flow batteries in the mix that are really good for longer duration energy storage. Nickel, zinc, sodium ion, those are kind of technologies that are still in their infancy. And where they're going to fall into the market, it's really hard to tell. So
I could share a few opinions. One thing that I've learned that maybe everybody doesn't appreciate, an electric vehicle, the lithium battery provides the high voltage drivetrain that powers the vehicle. But they typically have a lead battery that does the low voltage electronics, computers, and things like that. And may have noticed in recent years, cars getting more and more technology oriented. We're seeing more and more needs for batteries of different types, even in the vehicles. I don't think it's either or with respect to lithium and lead batteries. They provide a different function for an electric vehicle. But we're also seeing more applications for lead batteries for stationary storage, data centers, and for grid storage. But at this moment, I think we all feel like there's not enough materials to supply the market with all these materials, whether it's lithium or lead. It's just finding the right application for each of these materials. I don't think we're going to see a decline in the amount of lead battery production, but we certainly will see a great increase in lithium battery production would be our expectation.
Bill?
Add a whole lot different to that. I think it is very specific to the market and the application. I would agree, I think, with both parties. I don't think you see a large decline in lead acid type batteries as a result of the growth of lithium, because the markets are different that are causing that. The need that is being generated for the lithium battery is a different need that wasn't necessarily as large or strong as it's been historically from that perspective. So I think, yes, a lot of the growth opportunity, large growth opportunity is in let's say the near term, and you can debate the near term, somewhere in the next 10-year time frame probably is lithium. I definitely, and we are investing, so we do believe and understand that there are new technologies that will come, and we will develop better batteries than a lithium battery. Some of those may be still lithium based, but more solid electrolyte. Flow batteries have a definite place in grid storage from that standpoint, another area we're active in. So, I don't view it, let's say I take the optimistic view that all battery types at this point have a pretty bright future as we look at the transition that we're moving through. Some of them are going to grow at faster rates than others, but I think it's an overall positive market trend for batteries in general as part of energy storage.
Fantastic. And I know a couple of our speakers mentioned when you looked at prior presentations, there's definitely a focus in Missouri on the number of companies or even the R&D facilities, whether universities or private, that are looking into storage. So that the opportunities for growth there, I think there is an opportunity to maximize that and partner it with our partners here who are already here on the ground invested in Missouri. If you're unaware, there's currently the Missouri State Energy Plan has a working group dedicated to metals, minerals, and storage because it is a priority, because it is something that is based here in Missouri. The lead's not going anywhere. It's here in this ground, right? So the other minerals that are here are also here in this ground. So that group has looked at making sure that, number one, stakeholders and leaders know about the international impact on this industry and what that means. And I know Chris mentioned that, and as well as looking at ways to take that emphasis and look at whether it's friendshoring or bringing it closer to home, making it easier. If you remember the list there that was up there, shipping costs and highways and access, those things are on high priorities for companies. Missouri has those components along with these companies here that they can partner with for end of line. So there's, I think, as a state and as a community, we can do a lot to increase and improve our communication to other parties that want to come here to increase that industry. Now, while we might not be implementing or installing the batteries here in Missouri, there's nothing to stop us from recruiting those companies, increasing our growth, diversifying our economy. And with that comes the installation and the need with these companies looking for either backup or off-grid or collaborations with the utility. So I think there's a lot of opportunities there. And I know these three gentlemen and their companies have been playing a role in that. If you'd like to learn more, I know Jordan with Missouri Division of Energy is here and you can talk to him. I do chair that committee. I'm happy to talk to you about that as well. So make sure you reach out. This is a priority, I know, for the state as well as for NEI. With that, if there are no other questions, please. Yes, there is one more question.
Thank you. Tammy Stanke with Still Run. This is for Phil. Well, first of all, congratulations on winning the infrastructure award. That's great. I wondered, you had a slide up there that talked a little bit about some of the resources you deployed in your grant proposal. Would you be able to elaborate any more on that? I'm interested in knowing if this was your first grant application, anything you could share to help the rest of us be more successful.
This on? Yep. So actually, it was very new for us. So as a company, we don't typically rely on government grants very much at all. And so it was a relatively new thing for us. It was definitely outside of our wheelhouse of what we would normally do. And so we did have to bring a team together to do that. We don't, generally have a department that's working on grants for us on a general basis like that. So we did have to engage a number of external consultants. We found some very, very good ones, great ones that had a lot of experience with the Department of Energy and grant programs there. We also partnered, as I said before, with local companies here in St. Louis that we knew were doing other things that weren't necessarily related to what we were applying for, the FOA we were applying to, but we're working on other things that we knew would be connected, like building out our Justice 40 plan for St. Louis and partnering with Greater St. Louis from that standpoint. We also partnered with who will be the general contractor on the project, McCarthy, who has a great track record and history with doing government grant related construction projects as well. So, and that's, I would say the best advice I can give out of that whole thing is there's a lot here in partnering with other people, whether those are public, non-public agencies, quasi-public, to really support and grow that. We got great support from Craig from the Department of Energy here within the state of Missouri, and support from Governor Parsons, all of our legislators area. So, really is reach out and really connect a strong network of people around you when you have those things. Because for us, for sure, we did not have anywhere close to the internal resources to do this. It's not something that was normal for us. And so we relied a lot on external support, and we found great support in Missouri and in St. Louis specifically for that.
Thank you, Phil. I apologize for everybody online. The mood lighting was not our doing. We will work on that. But if everyone can join me in thanking these gentlemen for presenting on this very important topic. All right, we're at the tail end, the last corner of the conference. We've got two really interesting sessions coming up, but there's a break and there is sugar in the back of the room to get you past that last turn. Remember the last two cycles, clean energy life cycles, looking at wind and solar lifespans, repurposing, as well as hydrogen future. So for those of us here, there's some sugar in the back. For those of you home, go to your pantry, pull out a cookie. But thank you all very much. We'll be back in 15 minutes. We'll actually be back in about 10 minutes. All right, thank you all.